Hello, everyone. I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of Treasury Webinars. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us for our webinar today, Effective Cash Flow Forecasting, Working Capital, Business Intelligence, and Strategic Agility. First and foremost, I hope everyone is safe and healthy, and I want to convey the sincere gratitude of myself and everyone at Financial Sciences, our webinar partner, for all the relatives, friends, and families of each attendee who is on the front lines of fighting the coronavirus and what these people are doing every single day to help keep us all safe and healthy. I would like to also thank our webinar partner today, Financial Sciences, whose strong commitment to thought leadership and commitment to serving the Treasury profession has helped make this webinar possible today. Cash is the lifeblood of your organization, and effective cash management is more important than ever in its normal. Your ability to produce accurate and timely cash flow statements and to perform analysis based on those accurate and up-to-date reports is critical for assessing both the current health of your organization and making key business decisions. The timing, amount, and predictability of future cash flows should be an essential component of the budgeting and planning process of all companies, not just high growth and highly leveraged companies. Today, you will discover the mechanics and challenges and benefits of forecasting your company's free cash flow. You'll learn how effective cash flow forecasting can offer your company key business intelligence that improves financial planning, fuels strategic agility, and empowers working capital decision-making while taking a more visual approach to managing your cash forecast. Before we get started, a quick few words about Treasury webinars, our exciting housekeeping items, and then I'm going to cover our learning objectives as they offer the pillars of our value proposition to you who are investing an hour of your valuable time with us today. At Treasury Webinars, we offer webinars designed to empower Treasury, accounts payable, and accounts receivable success at companies of all sizes across all industries. We only do what we do best, which is virtual events. Now for the exciting housekeeping items. Anyone interested in receiving CTP credits for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all of our polling questions, remain on for the duration of the webinar, and complete all the questions in our post-webinar survey, which will launch immediately after the conclusion of the webinar today. If you have any questions regarding CTP credit, please email to Ernie@treasurywebinars.com. Again, that's Ernie@treasurywebinars.com. We'd love to hear from you today. We can take your questions at any time in the Q&A, in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll do our best to get to your questions during our Q&A session at the end of the webinar, time permitting. Fear not, if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you directly after the webinar. Finally, we appreciate everyone's consideration in answering all of our polling questions and taking the short survey at the end of the webinar today. We always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. Now, our learning objectives, my promise to you today, and the value proposition for you to investing an hour of your tremendously valuable time with me today. I want you to understand the dimensions of effective cash forecasting. I want you to be able to identify and mitigate inherent barriers to cash forecasting success at your company. Understand the benefits of leveraging the right technology to achieve cash forecasting success at your company in any business environment. So right now, most of us are in that remote environment. Some of us may be transitioning back to the office, and I'd like to believe that we're not going to be back in that remote environment, but from what I'm seeing so far across the country in the response to COVID, I think we'll be going back and forth. So we need to make sure that we can achieve cash forecasting success in any business environment. And then I want you to be able to provide specific areas of your cash forecasting process to improve the value realized from your company's cash forecasting efforts. Now, how are we going to accomplish our learning objectives today? I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with the coronavirus and Treasury. I'll talk through defining your cash forecasting process and framework, talk about leveraging technology, and then I'll hand the floor over to Kurt, who is a seasoned practitioner, and he'll share with us some of his challenges and some of the ways they've been able to improve their cash forecasting. And then I'll bring Alf Newland and Nathan in, and they will show us how companies are visually managing their cash forecasts. I've always found this really fascinating, and it really helps bring things to life. So we'll see a short demo of exactly how that's done. Then we'll wrap things up with some final thoughts and resources. And so the first thing I like to do is I like to talk about the coronavirus. Treasury. I'm really revising my presentation to really offer up-to-date content and really offer advice that's not only relevant to the title of the webinar, but also just success in Treasury. So I hope that you find this information useful. And so just some points to think about and consider if you haven't done these yet, and maybe some of this information you want to share with your colleagues and help make everybody more productive in this remote reality. And so you need to understand the challenges in managing a remote workforce. Many of you, you may not have managed someone remotely, and so that's certainly a different challenge. And so there are a lot of resources out there, right, to help you if you're new in this realm. So I have some of those myself. You can find some of those at Stamply.com. And so this is really important, and you should reach out. Maybe other folks in your company, maybe your sales manager has managed people remotely. And so it's definitely a different environment. And so you need to make sure that this is a skill. And some people have a knack for it and some don't, but don't worry. If you don't, there's a lot of resources out there for you. You need to understand the consequences, right, that the pandemic and the impacts are having and will on your suppliers, customers, banks, and service providers. So we're all going through challenges. And so what we need to do is we need to understand what the consequences are. And I've got this a few slides shortly here. But so let's go ahead. So let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit later. And so you need to understand the consequences the coronavirus will have on your Treasury success metrics. And so there are some folks that are able to maintain their Treasury metrics, right, in this environment, and that's amazing. And kudos to you. But most of the companies are going to have to adjust, right, what those metrics are. So let's be mindful of what those are. You're going to have inherent barriers to that success, especially those of you that are focused on items such as DSO and DPO. Those are things we just might have to adjust. And those of you who are managers, especially, you want to communicate more with your employees. You want to communicate more with your coworkers. And so it's really important to communicate more. And we have to all get comfortable being on camera a little bit more. So I've found Zoom meetings useful. I've also found an app called Slack useful. I think it's more effective than email because we're all getting barraged with emails. And so ways, you need to identify ways to keep your employees engaged. And so there are several techniques that my company Stamply has used to keep us engaged. We've had events where everyone's taken pictures of their office environment, try and guess what that is. We have some custom COVID mask and taking pictures and trying to figure out whose that is. We have some virtual exercise programs. We have some virtual karaoke going on. We have some virtual game playing going on. We have virtual happy hour going on, and we also have virtual coffee hours. And so you need to be a little bit innovative there, but I think you should try these things, and your employees will love it. Another thing you want to do along those same lines is show your appreciation for your employees. Just the other day, out of nowhere, I got a gift card for my employer for food to be brought in, like Grubhub and Uber Eats. And so that was incredibly nice, and that really meant a lot to me. And so those little gestures right now that you can do for your employees and your colleagues, those are going to be tremendously valued. There's little things that you can do to show your employees that you care and that you understand there's new challenges for them. You have to understand all these different challenges, and if someone's dog barks in the background or you have noise or the volume, you have to be a little bit understanding on that. You want to communicate more with your suppliers and customers and banks and service providers. And so I think that's incredibly important. So if you haven't been communicating, especially with your banks, I really encourage you to do that. Communicate with your suppliers and customers, see what's going on with them, see what their challenges are, and then maybe you can identify ways that you can offer more value to your suppliers, customers, banks, and service providers. Relationships are built during times of crisis. If everything's going 100% amazing, then no one's going to have any issue. You really find out whether someone views you as a transaction or a relationship once there is a crisis. And so let's all be mindful of that, and let's be mindful in the way that we're communicating with people as well. Myself, I always try and start off with, I hope you're safe and healthy and your family's safe and healthy. And so just kind of touch base on that. It really makes a difference. And then this might be the most important point here that I've got at number 8, because I wanted to really end with it. Realign on your expectations with your boss, with your staff. colleagues, suppliers, customers, banks, and service providers. And so this is a good time to level set. And hopefully we've all had some time to take a look in the mirror and see how we can do better. But also, if there are expectations that your boss has that you not be able to meet. I know from talking with several treasury managers and treasurers, the expectations from their bosses have changed in terms of reporting and things of that nature. But we need to look at what those are, and if they're even possible, with your staff, right? Let's make sure that everyone's on the same page. And if there's challenges that they have, right, you might need to give them more support. Just make sure they have what they need, right, to deliver what you want. Same thing with your suppliers. Let's see on what's going on. If we're not going to be able to pay as we normally would, we have to be honest, and we should be honest. And so let's be honest and authentic with your customers. Ask them, right, if they're having issues in their industry, they might not be able to pay you on the same terms. So you have to come to some sort of agreement. And so you want your customers to feel comfortable communicating with you and being honest with you, right? I mean, I would rather want to be able to understand my cash needs, right, my borrowing needs, and be able to communicate to my CFO and senior staff, right, that we might not see any coming in that we might need to adjust our hedging strategies. We need to let our banks know, right? Maybe we're going to trip our covenant calculations. And so these things are incredibly important. So in summary, communicate, and let's realign on those expectations, and let's find ways to offer more value. Now, I've had the opportunity to be involved in the Global Crisis Monitor Survey, which started back in April, that we've transitioned to the Global Recovery Monitor Survey. It is put on by the Treasury Coalition, which is a group of companies that serve the Treasury profession, led by Strategic Treasurer and Craig Jeffrey. And so what we've been doing is we've been tracking some of the sentiments and some of the responses and just some of the thoughts of Treasury and finance leaders across the globe. And this has been incredibly valuable to me to keep my finger on the pulse. But I think for you as well, if you haven't had the opportunity to take the survey yet, I encourage you to do so. It only takes 5 minutes, but I think it's incredibly insightful. So just a little background from our most recent survey. We have had over 1,000 respondents from across the globe, so we've got a really good cross section. And here's some things that stuck out to me. Some companies, 60% don't have plans, so I think we need to do better, right? So I think it's incredibly important that companies understand, right, what they're going to be doing, especially if you're a manager. You should reach out to your company leaders and say, okay, what are the plans, right, that we're going to do? How are we going to do this? What needs to change in terms of safety and protocols? How much notice are we going to give people? Are we going to let people work from home? How do we do that, right? And all along, we've been seeing AR concerns that have been off the charts. I think those have settled down a little bit, and I'll go over some of the trends and what we've seen in a few moments, but we're seeing a little bit better positivity there. We've started to align that people think financial normalcy is going to be around 11 months. So we're looking at April 2021 as a consensus, I would say. I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I think we're going to go out even longer, and I wish our health seriousness would be stable. At 10 on the activity that I'm seeing, I'm not really, we need to be ready. And then it's good to see that the safety concerns on our staff and being mindful of that has ticked back up as we all start to think about, in certain states, going back to the office. So again, I think this has been incredibly valuable for the Treasury profession, and I applaud Craig Jeffrey and his team for putting that coalition together. And this slide is a little dense. Again, if you want copies of the slides, please reach out to me. This to me is just fascinating. And so we start to look at some of the trends right out of the gate. Business continuity planning was a top concern, and what I've heard from an awful lot of folks is out of the gate, they may have had a business continuity plan, but it was only for a week or two, right? And so a lot of companies weren't ready to be out of the office, and so we're seeing more of a focus on that. And I think it's a good thing for us going forward that we're all going to be ready, right? And we need to have those testing, and now those business continuity plans are really up to speed. And so we've seen that concern kind of wane over the coming weeks. Hopefully that we're all ready to go and get back to the office. Now, what we don't want to do is go back to the office and forget all the lessons learned. And so I always talk about this, especially the last couple of weeks. Now, we've learned a lot of good lessons in terms of communication and relationships and risk management that we need to take. So we need to take the best of the best. And so we should harmonize our best practices across all the different business environments. We saw staff safety protocols, right? Kind of it was high, but then as we mentioned, right, we're starting to see that be more of a concern as people are looking to go back into the office. Staff awareness of plans of going back to the office. I hope this goes up. We need to let our employees know, right, what's going on, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. And make sure, if we can, let's not force people to go back in the office. If we're able to accommodate them remotely, I think it's important to do that. I mean, it's you want to support your employees. Employee retention talent is very hard to replace. Country preparedness, where you stand depends on where you sit. And so that depends on the nature of where you're doing business and your business footprint. And so that's been pretty steady. Direct impact to the business, obviously that's a big concern, and that's been first. And so out of the gate, I think folks didn't really know what to expect. And dovetailing on that to the next point, access to liquidity. Out of the gate, people are like, no, I don't know what's going on. It's not going to last. Guess what? As soon as we had our first 30 days out and people saw this DSO and receipts not coming in, they're like, uh-oh, so it went up to first. And then I think we've kind of leveled out. So I think especially as people have been in this remote environment, probably going on a couple months now, they're starting to get a better handle on that. We'll talk about this. I'm sure a lot of folks' cash forecasts were just blown out of the water. And then we have recessions in the companies you operate. That depends on your global footprint. And so just to set the stage, right? What's the top priority for Treasury? It's cash forecasting, and I bet that would even be more of a solid one here in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So let's go ahead and launch our first polling question. I know everyone has been anxiously waiting for the polling question, asking you to share with us the biggest challenge your company currently faces relative to cash forecasting. And so let's go ahead and, oh, never mind, I launched the wrong polling question. How would you describe the visibility of your cash forecasting efforts? So that's obviously a tremendously relevant as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Would you say, because this is really sets the stage, right, on your ability, you need that visibility, right, in your cash forecasting. Would you say very limited, somewhat limited, good in places, you still have blind spots, it's good across the board but not optimal, or you would be kind of in nirvana place, you have 20/20 vision? And then if you really had any kind of shortfalls, right, going into the COVID pandemic in the remote environment, I think those are really amplified, and some of you probably really kind of learned the hard way the importance of that visibility. And so let's go ahead. I'm going to give you guys a couple more seconds, answer the polling question. Okay, let's go ahead and take a quick peek. So what we see, I'm glad that we see 20% that had that 20/20 vision. So that's fantastic and ideal. But we still have almost 50%, right, that still have those blind spots. And I think the technology is out there for us. So I think our goal should be to get there. So again, I'm glad to see we've got kind of an even split, but we still have a long way to go. And hopefully you'll be inspired to get that visibility to where it needs to be. But also the other thing is that now is a good time to sell the need for that visibility and investing in that visibility, because we need to offer that, right, information we're being asked. So so you tell your boss, I can't manage what I can't see, right? So let's dig in cash forecasting. So first of all, I kind of like to set the stage here. So just to level set, and I've used these myself in the same light, but this is important, right? Budget is what you'd like to happen. Plan is how you're going to make it happen. And this is what you think will happen, even if you don't like it. That's a forecast, right? If someone doesn't like your forecast, tell them that's too bad. This is what's going to happen, right? And so to set the stage for forecasting, that forecast success, and this seems, like it's something that we should already, know right out of the gate. It's just something you need to think about and make sure that everyone in your organization is on the same page. So you may be using different types of forecasts for different purposes, right? And so there's an operational forecast that's 1 to 30 days. Short term, people would usually characterize maybe a 13-week forecast. Medium term example would be a 12-month rolling, and then the long term is strategic. So the type and the goal, right? You have to get the basics right, before you go anywhere else. So you need to define the goals of your forecast, right? So if you're going to manage short-term borrowings, that's really important, and you'll start to see, oh, that's probably operational. Tied to my balance sheet forecasting, well, that's probably a little bit long-term in managing your capital structure. So what is the purpose? What is the type? What is the level of accuracy that's going to impact your decisions? And so there's always a cost and a benefit to investing in more accuracy, but you need to understand, right? What's the benefit? Is it going to impact my decision? What's this information used for? And so in my mind, if you're not going to impact your decisions, then it's not tremendously important to make that investment. And so let's talk about your cash flow IQ. And so this is all setting the stage for success. Your IQ, you need to map your cash flows in detail if you haven't done that. Identify your inflows and outflows. This seems like common sense, but believe me, it's something you need to take a look at every so often. Identify who within your company drives these cash flows. This is important, right? Who's doing what? They need to understand what risk exposures they might be causing. And then you need to identify all systems used to remove. So you got to get a handle on people, process, and technology. You need visibility into all of these things. The more visibility you have, the better you're going to be at your cash forecasting. And so let's take a look at the framework. I have a lot of slides from this presentation from the 2000 AFP annual conference. There's a hyperlink there. I use this still. It's 4 years old, but almost 4 years old. This is the best I've seen. So I do not want to reinvent the wheel. I just love how this is laid out. So we'll talk about indirect model. In my mind today, we need to do a direct model because we have the data and people want this data almost every day now. So you have here's the framework. You have your drivers, your process, and your methodology. You have your data and your tools, your metrics, and your behavior in your organization. So you need to look at all of these components because they can all impact your cash forecasting. So your indirect model is that top down from your P&L, but this is what I recommend in today's world. It's a bottom up micro view, looking at business unit segments, cost centers. It's like, how low do you want to go? For me, if I have the data and it's quality data, I want to go into the weeds. This is where I focus detailed projection of receipts and disbursements. And then we want to be able to inform decisions within a quarter, a week, a day, maybe an hour. Some folks use a hybrid, so you may use an indirect model for your P&L and balance sheet, but you're going to use that direct model to make your borrowing decisions and your daily investment decisions. On the direct model, again, you're estimating the amounts and timing and cash inflows and outflows. You leverage your transactional data. And what we really need to understand for most companies is that AP and AR, right? In the payment terms, we need to take control of how and when we make payments and how and when we get paid. And the more control we have, the better we're going to be at predicting those. And this is going to really get us up to that cash forecasting accuracy. We're going to have some inherent barriers to cash forecasting accuracy. We need to understand what those are. And then we also need to find a way to predict cash flow drivers that can't be forecasted effectively using transactional data somehow. So there are going to be things that we can see and control and things we don't control. Incredibly important, right? Your drivers. You need to understand your drivers, right? Receipts and collections, disbursements and spend. And for some companies, these items are more prevalent, but in general, from what I've seen at most companies, get your handle on your receipts, collections, your disbursements and spend, and your capital expenditures, you're in good shape. You should have you should be able to predict your intercompany settlements. You should be able to predict, for most companies, your payroll and benefits. Now, if you're in a retail industry, that can go up quite a bit. So, and then there's endogenous factors. When I used to work at a submersible motor manufacturing, right, we had weather, but here it is: receipts and forecast, consolidation, variance analysis, learn and improve, and then the behavior and organization. And this is why I like this. You need to have an accountability model, right, that's based on your cash flow drivers. And so, right, it's like customer receipts, right, disbursements. Who can we look to, right? Who are we looking to own this piece and to inform our forecast? And we need to make sure that our inputs to our forecast and our model are consistent across all of our owners, and then our input providers, right? And this is incredibly important. AR, collections, AP, right? Treasury, staff, payroll. So we need to understand what's driving all of these cash flows, right, in and out, and understand how can we take more control of them, how can we better predict what they are. The more control, right, the better we're going to be able to do. The data and tools, right, a lot of people are still using Excel, but more are using ERP modules, TMS models, and just other applications. So there's a lot of data being passed back and forth. We'll talk about that a little later. The complete technology discussion is a whole nother webinar, but we'll touch on what I think is an amazing way to look at cash forecasting in that visual manner. And so again, I'm happy to send you the slides, so please let me know. I'm clipping through these pretty quickly because I want to make sure that we have time for our other speakers today. And then your reporting, and then you got to have some metrics, right? What's your accuracy, right? What's your timeliness? What's your KPI? So you have to be able to report accuracy reporting. Again, what level of accuracy do you need, right? Is that impacting decisions? And then what kind of reporting do we want? Incredibly important, our variance analysis. And Alpha Nathan will show us how it's really cool to look at this visually, and then the answers to what's driving the variances really become apparent. And so kind of the bottom line for the cash forecasting method and workflow, this seems like common sense, but believe me, you should share this with all your stake owners and probably review this, yourself, right? And with your CFO. I mean, these are the things that matter. You need to make sure you understand the current and intended purpose of your cash forecast. That's the foundation. If you don't have that, you're not going to get there. You need to understand your data, its sources, its relative accuracy. What's your data governance? Okay, I can only get this level of accuracy on this certain input. Is that good enough, right? If it's wrong, is it going to make us make a suboptimal decision? These are things. Data, good data. Big data is not good data, by the way. Let's have a data diet. Focus on the drivers, right, of your variance within your current forecast, and focus originally on the sources you can control and do the best you can with the sources you can't. With the sources you can't, I always use that as my inherent barrier. I can get up to, hopefully 90%, 80%, whatever that might be, but I just really am not comfortable saying I should be able to get better given the knowledge that I have. And then in selecting a forecasting method, don't try and fit a method or procedure. Let your data tell you, right, what we're doing. I have a story. I used to work at Franklin Electric, submersible motor manufacturer. I came out of school. I was a quantitative analysis expert. I taught PhD level quantitative analysis. That's Franklin Electric. I'm going to do a cash forecast. Yeah, maybe I did a Monte Carlo simulation, and then the product manager had a simple model where it looked at what happened last period in a weather shifter, and needless to say, he cleaned my clock. So I got put in my place really quickly because he understood, right, what was going on and what was driving the data. And I was just trying to force sophistication on something that didn't need it. Again, let your objectives and data drive your process and not the statistical or method of forecasting. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, which I'm sure you're all happy. This was always my favorite part in webinars, is the practitioner case study. So now I'd like to introduce you all Kurt Simpson. He's a Treasury Manager, Liquidity Planning Analysis at OneMain Financial. So Kurt's going to give us some of his challenges and some of his learning. So Kurt, welcome to the webinar, and the floor is yours, my friend.
All right, thank you, Ernie. So as you can see on this slide, I work for OneMain Financial. OneMain is a consumer lending company that's been around for over 100 years. We have over 1,500 branches located throughout the United States. We are a publicly traded company. Our ticker is OMF, and if you want to know more about us, please visit onemainfinancial.com. Now, I haven't been here for 100 years, but I have been at OneMain for just over 20. I spent about 15 years in FP&A, and I've been in Treasury now for almost 5. What I plan to do today is give you a little background on how liquidity planning at OneMain has evolved over the years, and give you some examples of how we use short-term forecasting to identify and handle potential liquidity concerns. So when I was asked to do this today, one of the things I was thinking about is what's changed during my time here. So 20 years ago, obviously, we didn't have immediate access to detailed daily reporting like we have today. So doing an accurate daily forecast wasn't even really an option. The financial crisis of 08-09 made liquidity planning a much higher priority here at OneMain and basically everywhere else. Net income, leverage, losses, these were still important. But even so, we had to prove to auditors, investors, and sometimes even ourselves that we had enough cash, or at least access to enough cash, to survive beyond the next 12 months. The focus on liquidity management was definitely heightened by the Great Recession, and that increased focus continues today. Another big change from 20 years ago, and this is just us, is how OneMain issues debt. OneMain used to regularly access short-term debt markets to keep cash at a certain level, and we would supplement that funding with occasional long-term bond issuances. Over the years, we've transitioned to becoming a programmatic issuer of both asset-backed securities and high-yield bonds. We typically do 4 to 6 ABS deals each year, along with 1 or 2 unsecured bond issuances. In addition to that, we have access to $7.1 billion in revolving conduit facilities, revolving credit facilities with a number of different banks. We can use these facilities either for short-term funding needs or in case of emergencies. So having worked in both FP&A and Treasury, I've noted some key differences here between the forecasting that I do today in Treasury versus what's typically done by FP&A. So FP&A focuses on medium to long-term strategic plans. Our FP&A team is currently focused on a business plan that is covering the remainder of 2020 and the full year of 2021. In Treasury, we focus on short-term forecasting. What are our cash needs over the next week, the next month, and the next 3 months? We maintain a rolling 3-month daily forecast. FP&A creates a full-blown business plan. They engage teams throughout the organization to put together a comprehensive plan that includes everything from losses to volume to technology costs. They're expected to come out with a detailed P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow forecast, in addition to creating projections for any other key business metrics. Cash and debt is just part of their process. In Treasury, we have a much more narrow focus. When do we need cash and how much? So dates and amounts. FP&A reviews variances between actuals and plan once a month as part of our accounting closing process. That's not to say that they don't track things like volume and delinquencies throughout the month, but they don't really report on those variances, or they don't really make adjustments to their forecast until month end typically. Treasury, we monitor cash daily, and a break in our forecast could mean that we don't have enough cash to meet our financial obligations. Monitoring and forecasting cash is considered a key control by our risk management team. If cash drops below a certain level, we're required by our risk management policy to notify our board of directors, which is something that I don't ever intend to have to do. I don't even know what the board notification process is, and I don't intend to find out. Finally, FP&A runs through their massive process twice a year typically. They create an annual plan and revise it with a mid-year forecast, make minor adjustments as they go. We revise and distribute our 3-month rolling forecast on a weekly basis. Now, this next slide is a very high-level, almost cartoonish, simplified view of the difference between how FP&A views 1 month to the next versus Treasury. Completely made up numbers for illustrative purposes only. If you ask FP&A in this simplified example, do we have any cash concerns during the month of May? Well, they would tell you that we'll start with $1,000 and we'll end with $1,000. So no worries, right? Now, I'm not going to try to walk you through, I'm not going to try to walk you through a typical month at OneMain. It does have its share of peaks and valleys as shown here, but let's just pretend for simplification that this Treasury forecast is your personal budget. You know that you have a car payment due early in the month, mortgage in the middle of the month, and maybe your gas and electric is your next largest bill, and that's near the end. Your car payment and mortgage are always going to be the same timing, same amount. Gas and electric timing will be consistent, but the amount will fluctuate depending on the time of the year and even the weather. Now, what's not always constant is when you get paid. If you're like me and many others, we get paid bi-weekly. Some months I get paid during the first week and the third week. Other months it's the second and the fourth. So depending on how my paychecks fall, I may have to make some minor adjustments to how I handle my cash. So in this example, I'm showing early in the month a 1-day valley that shows us getting close to that board notification threshold. Given that it's only 1 day, there are some things that we can do internally to help minimize the risk of dropping below that line. Just like you or I might be able to use the credit card to pay for gas or groceries if we have temporary cash concerns, there are a few levers that we can pull internally to help keep us above that line for a day, maybe even 2. Now, if this valley were longer, we would need to consider drawing on our Conduit credit facilities, even if only for a week, to make sure that we can meet our cash obligations and be ready for any potential surprises. In other words, it's not just as simple as starting and ending with $1,000. Lots of ups and downs, lots of peaks and valleys during a normal month here at OneMain, as I'm sure a lot of you experience where you work. So as I mentioned earlier, we are a consumer lending company. We borrow money from investors and make loans to our customers. Cash is our inventory. And like most businesses, we have daily, monthly, and other seasonal cycles that affect our liquidity needs. So an example of one of the challenges that we have when forecasting a daily forecast is every May and November, we have customer appreciation days. We decorate our branches, we increase our advertising, and enhance the branch incentive plans. The goal, obviously, to get new customers in the door. We also talk to existing customers about increasing and extending the terms of their current loans. Now, the contests are typically set in the second half of each month, meaning the first half is probably going to look pretty normal from a cash perspective. But of course, we have to account for that additional liquidity need on the back end. Also, when an existing customer renews a loan, we will often defer the following month's payment for them. So it's not just additional cash needed in May and November, we also have to plan for lower collections the following months of June and December. Another example of business cycles is quarterly trends, of course. First quarter for us, kind of similar to retail, is usually a slower time. Our branches are typically focused on collections and maintaining customer relationships, and we don't typically do our first long-term debt deal until March or even sometimes April because we typically don't need the cash. But what I'm leading to is an example of a forecasting problem that we encountered during the first quarter a couple of years ago. It was early January, and based on previous year's trends and based on the newly blessed FP&A business plan, we thought we had enough cash to get through at least the end of February. We had a debt deal planned for early March, so we were expecting a pretty quiet quarter. After updating the weekly forecast for the first week in January, I saw that we had burned through quite a bit of cash. But of course, 1 week does not a trend make. So let's not push the panic button yet, but let's continue to monitor those daily cash balances. The next week when I updated the forecast, we knew that we had some work to do. It no longer appeared that we had enough cash to get through the end of February. So I'm calling this a problem, but it's really only a problem for Treasury. So what happens when one main makes more loans than we plan to make in a month or a quarter? It's great for the branches. You know, they're going to exceed their goals. The employees are probably going to get some extra cash in their paycheck at the end of the quarter. As long as we're making the right loans and we don't see an increase in losses or delinquency, we will exceed market and investor expectations for the quarter, and the executive team will have a great story to tell on the quarterly earnings call. Now, FP&A, they'll have some variances to explain during the monthly accounting close process, but that's expected and that's okay. And of course, it's much easier to explain those variances when everything is going great. But what about Treasury? Poor Treasury, right? We have to scramble and go into decision-making mode. Do we need to draw on our conduit facilities? How much and when? That's always the big question, how much and when? And of course, you have to balance any planned draws with the knowledge that excess cash means excess interest expense. It's a drag on earnings. So we can't just go to management and say, well, we want to borrow $1 billion just to be careful if you really only need 200 million. So we have to be able to come up with a solid estimate before we can draw on those bank lines. So some of the considerations before we execute a conduit draw, first, obviously, communicate with your partners throughout the company. We talk to FP&A and operations, make sure that you confirm that the trends that you're seeing in your banking activities match what they're seeing in their daily system reports. Verify the trend is actually happening and that it's not just a reporting issue. To the extent possible, if you can determine a cause, that is going to be very helpful. In this example, HR had made a change to the first quarter branch incentive program. Instead of that program focusing on collections and delinquencies, somebody thought it would be fun to focus on the number of loans being made that quarter. It was a little bit different. And of course, they don't have to ask our permission to make those changes, but it's nice to know. If you can determine the cause, then hopefully you can determine the timing. In this case, we found out the contest would run through the first quarter. So we needed to really focus on that next 3-month forecast. Once we had verified what we were seeing, determined the cause, and found out that we would have an issue through the end of March, we were able to go back, adjust our forecast, and answer those critical questions of how much cash and when do we need it, what are the amounts, and what are the timings. Now, executing a conduit draw isn't as simple as just swiping the credit card. It takes multiple people from Treasury, accounting, and legal to draw funds from our facilities. First, we have to identify a pool of receivables to be used as collateral. Those receivables are separated and placed into a trust on our balance sheet. We have to determine which bank lines we're going to use, and we have to give notification to that bank. Overall, this takes 3 to 5 days, and this is an example of why we do a daily rolling 3-month forecast. Now, in summary, in this case, we were quickly able to make some decisions and execute several draws that quarter in order to maintain adequate liquidity levels before we did our first long-term debt deal in March. Now, looking forward, as we continue to try to improve upon our forecast process, here are some of the things that we're focused on. Obviously, everyone wants to rely less on Excel and manual processes. And I hate to admit this, especially on this kind of a call, but we currently have someone on our cash management team who copies data from our Treasury workstation into Excel every day, which summarizes the prior day's cash activities, and then they email that Excel file to about 10 to 12 people. We all work in finance, and of course, we all love Excel. But I also know that we have reports that are automatically produced and distributed by that same Treasury workstation that need no manual intervention. We need to do less copying and pasting and let the systems handle the reporting where possible. Second, let the technology help with those intramonth trends, that jagged forecast line that I showed you earlier. So going back and kind of comparing that to your personal budget again, when I refresh our daily rolling forecast, I focus on the mortgage, the car payment, paychecks, and the gas and electric. But I know that we have a lot of other internal moving parts that I'm not accounting for. Now, they're fairly small, but maybe there are some trends there that I have not yet identified. The right system, I believe, should be able to automatically adjust for both large and small variances that we commonly see throughout each month. And finally, during a time, especially like today, when we're dealing with something like COVID-19, we want to be able to improve our ability to quickly do multiple forecasts and scenarios. So in that loan volume problem example that I gave earlier, it would have been reasonable for senior management to ask to see multiple scenarios, maybe where volume is 5%, 10%, and 15% over plan for the quarter, before we make a decision on doing a draw. Now, this would mean creating multiple forecasts in multiple Excel files, and then making another spreadsheet to summarize what we see in those multiple Excel files. The right system should be able to do a lot of that for us. Also, the ability to forecast in ranges has become very important. With COVID-19, there's still a lot of uncertainty about where our business and the economy is going to be over the next few months. So giving ranges on certain variables may be the safest way to ensure that management has a good idea of where things may fall in the near future. So in summary, I've tried to give you a little background about liquidity planning at OneMain. For us, again, it's a key control. We have to be able to meet our financial obligations, but we also don't want to carry excess cash. And although we have access to $7.1 billion in credit facilities, it's important that we can accurately present a case to management showing how much cash we need it and when we need it before we're able to draw on those facilities. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I will hand it back over to Ernie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kurt, for your tremendous insights and your willingness to share with us your details and your Excel challenges. Don't worry, I can assure you that you are not alone in your Excel challenges. And so now we're going to pivot a little bit, and this is something that I found really enlightening to me over the past few years as I've worked with financial sciences. It's the art of visually managing forecasts. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to my colleagues at Financial Sciences. So I'll go ahead and first I'll hand the floor over to Alf, and then Alf will take us through some context, and then he'll hand the floor over to Nathan, who will drive us through an enlightening product demo. Alf, welcome to the webinar. The floor is yours, my friend.
Hey, thank you, Ernie. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alf Newland from Financial Sciences. And today we're going to show you a little bit about how you can automate the forecast process. And Ernie, could you have the next slide, please? So let's just step back a little bit and look at what a generic forecast looks like. And starting at number one, you certainly have to have a lot of data. And the data comes from lots of different sources, not just cash, not just ERP, but potentially from the field, from spreadsheets, from other systems. And also it tends to be a lot of data. And you take that data, and the next challenge is to basically discover patterns in that data, because this forecasting is not simple. It's not simple averages or even simple days, but there's lots of different patterns driven by different business processes. And to forecast correctly, particularly to automate, you have to be able to see those patterns, and that's not easy. Once you have patterns and you have an understanding, then you can actually automate a lot of them using modeling. The modeling is not simple, but it certainly can be very quantitative, and you certainly can automate the use of models. Once you have modeling, you of course want to see number 4, you want to have forecasts generated for you, so you don't have to do that manually in Excel. And of course, once you have forecasts, you want to compare those forecasts not not just to actual, but also potentially to different types of forecasts that might compete with one another. And very, very important, this is a repetitive, ongoing process that you constantly go through, get information, look for patterns, create models, generate forecasts, benchmark, tune, rinse and repeat. Now we want to come back and actually see, given this overview, how can we automate some of this? And if you could cut over to Nate, Ernie.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Alf.
Okay, so Nate, if you could just bring that that visual in the center. So what we're going to do is take this particular overview, and in the interest of time, we're going to skip number 1. That's actually a pretty significant part of managing data. But in the interest of time, we're going to just spend time the rest of the cycle, and we're going to show you how patterns can pattern recognition can be automated, and how you can build models from those patterns, actually generate forecasts, and then do some automated benchmarking and tuning of the model. And I'm going to turn it over to Nate at this point.
Great. Thank you very much, Alf. So this is, I'll leave this lifecycle up in the top corner, and we'll reference it throughout our demonstration today. And as Alf said, we'll skip the categorization, but we'll go ahead and launch our forecasting cockpit. This is a user's interactive homepage for a specific area in Treasury, in this case, forecasting. And we'll skip right into the modeling piece. And I'm sorry, right into the pattern recognition piece. So here we're gonna look, in this case, at historical transactions for sales, for accounts receivable sales. This cash flow category, as we'll refer to it as we go through, and we're going to look for patterns in that historical activity and then use those patterns to create models and follow this life cycle as Alf just walked us through. So as I said, we're going to start with accounts receivable, the sales category, and this cockpit here is showing us a lot of different data attributes and characteristics about when these transactions occur and the volume. So we can see, for instance, that they kind of happen pretty much on all days of the week, but they don't happen in all weeks of the month. They seem to spike towards the end of the month. They don't seem to have a business or calendar day relation. And certainly one important note is there's a huge range in the minimum and maximum. And therefore, it's really important to identify why these big shifts are happening. And it rules out some types of forecasting methods. If you have a big range like this, for instance, you can't use a simple average because you just won't get spikes to the extent that you can predict them. And down below, we have a couple more metrics, but certainly you can see it seems to have some kind of quarterly pattern to it. So we'll go ahead and dig in a little bit more. So this is just one way of looking at all the different data attributes. We can also view a calendar of forecasted or historical activity. So I'll go ahead and bring up a calendar, and this is for all of the data in all the transactions in the system. You can see that my AR sales is part of that. But if I want to just specifically look, I can get a very focused cash calendar on a certain type of transaction, sticking with AR sales, and just looking at this to get out all the noise and looking and seeing, using color to denote when I have heavier days, bigger days, and lighter color when I have less. So on my lighter color days, I see small amounts of transactions in the thousands or tens of thousands, but on my heavier days, I see in the millions. So at this point, we've pretty much confirmed that we see quarterly seasonality or quarterly trends, and they seem to be at the end of the quarter. And just to make it really easy to refer to this throughout the rest of the demo, the trend that we've identified and went back and confirmed with the business is that the sales team they're all incentivized, and they're basically turbocharging at the end of each quarter to get all their numbers in. So it's a question of both reporting and that business activity. So now that we've identified this pattern, let's go back and take a look at our chart. So we've seen these quarterly spikes, and now we want to basically create a model so that we don't have to go in and use worksheets and manually do this. We want to create a model that will help automate, either semi-automate or fully automate the creation of these AR sales forecasts from history. So for that, I'm going to jump into our next screen, which is our forecast generator. And this module is used to create forecast models from historical activity and as well as many other sources. So we're not really touching on this today, but bringing in information from ERP, AR, sales, all of that, that's certainly all in scope for this module. But it basically, for today, we're going to focus mostly until the end on using historical activity for trends and patterns, and using that for our model. So I'm going to start with a very simple model. This module is broken up into roughly 2 sections, and it does have a lot of capability and a lot of granularity, so that's the reason for a lot of fields. You can filter for your activity, and in this case, we're going to just look at historical activity, and then you can transform and propagate that activity forward. So basically, you're looking for some period where you have activity or some pattern, and then you can project it over a future period. In my first very simple example, we'll use an average where we take 90 days of history for vendor payments, and we get a simple average, and we take every single business day into account, even days where there's no activity. So taking that simple average from all those days, I get this number, and then applying a little bit of smoothing, a little bit of rounding that I put in the transform, this is the average number. And that average comes from all of this historical activity. This does, as I said, it does include days with 0 balances, so this certainly would bring down my spikes. It's pretty good for activity that's truly daily and doesn't really have spikes that have trends or anything like that, and you just kind of need a placeholder. But to the extent that that transaction type is not truly daily, it certainly would not be the right tool. So in that case, you can switch and just use the days observed, the days where there is activity. In this case, my number will go way up because I won't be using days with 0. So my average number will go way up, but my daily forecast no longer makes sense. So if I go ahead and save this, it's going to give me a daily number that's way too high. So I can use this daily number in a lot of different ways. I can specify that it's just for a certain day of the week. In this case, let's say instead of daily, no, this is actually a weekly. And so take that same number and project it out weekly over my forecast period. Each Friday, you can see the value date of the Fridays at the end of each week. But these are very, very handy tools for a lot of different forecast categories, but they don't actually cover our original case. So let's switch back to that case for just 1 minute. In this case, what we see is it's not truly daily. There really are spikes, and we talked about what those are, and what's the best way to get at those spikes and clarify what they are at a technical level so that you can model them. So the final model that we're going to cover today is basically an automated daily average that looks at, for whatever your filter range is, all of your forecasts that fall on the first Monday, and then the second Monday, and then the third Monday, and the fourth Monday, and then the first Tuesday, second Tuesday, third Tuesday. So basically creating an average for each of these numbers, but keeping all the data attributes intact so that you can say, if this is the end of quarter Monday, if this Monday is in the end of the quarter, it's different than a Monday that's not in the end of the quarter. So using those data attributes, we can create this last model that I'll show you. And in this model, we're taking a whole quarter of activity, and we're seeing all the spikes, the peaks and valleys, and we have all that in the detail history, which is here, but summarized by day. If I look at it by value date now, here's the history that we're looking at. You can see 2018, August, then here's September, so you can see spikes in September, as we said, so this is our history. And then take that forecast and push it out into the future. So again, we're going to, I think right now I'm forecasting for August and September, but you can see that same spike is being applied, and lots of rules for smoothing and next business day, holidays, all that kind of thing for aligning it onto a different schedule. So quickly wrapping up, now that we've looked at the pattern, we've implemented the model, what does that look like actually when we go ahead and execute and save those forecasts or execute the model? And bringing up a worksheet view now, just like I showed in the calendar view earlier, you can see all of the activity together in one view, including our accounts receivable. So there's like a worksheet view that gives me a certain criteria. So all activity for my one bank, US bank, all accounts, and I can see inflows and outflows. And one of the inflow categories is accounts receivable. And I see those spikes now from implementing that model. And that will go ahead and refresh on a periodic basis as I like. And I can always drill down and see all my raw forecast information at a detail level and drill back to it. And finally, to wrap up, and I'm running a little bit behind, so I want to go a little faster, is we have, now that we've, just to touch base back on the model, we've done the pattern discovery, and we've gone ahead and created a model in the model tool, and we've executed it. So we've generated those forecasts. We saw those show up on our worksheet, and that's great. So now we're in steady state. We have an automated forecast model. And now, as I've said before, we have to check in and benchmark it, tune it, and make sure it's correct. So we're going to wrap up with two items related to that. One is managing multiple sources of forecasts. So companies often have multiple sources, meaning not just FP&A, but Treasury has history. We have different people sending in emails, all different sources. You might have different numbers for the same forecast from different groups. You might want to do your own scenarios as Treasury apart. So this section really has to do with all of that, as well as the variance reporting on top. So if we look at a month, a year, breaking it into actual, plan, and forecast, this is showing me what did I project at the beginning of the year, my plan, what was my actual so far, and what was my forecast, and it compares it. You can see that it supports multiple scenarios. I won't go into the other scenarios for now, and lots of other filter criteria. But the idea here is that if I focus on May, my actual was a bit off of my forecast, but the actual did align. Sorry, my plan was off from my forecast. My forecast matched my actual, which you see here. And so in the beginning of the year, I thought I was going to have about 2 million balance left over. And you can see that forecast was revised over time. And by the end, 1 month in, it matched pretty closely with the actual that occurred. So that's important to note, that you can see that your performance not only changes, your performance can be tracked initially, but it can also be tracked over time. And breaking out those performance metrics and identifying how time is allowing you to improve them can also make your forecast get better faster, which is important to be able to track. And the very last one that I'll wrap up with before transitioning it back to you, Ernie, with just a little time left, is a comparison of multiple sources, a lot like what Kurt was talking about, where you have AR, where Treasury is a small item, or a subset of their list, but Treasury's got all the details. And this example is basically taking the Treasury forecast, like I showed you, from modeling, from history, and taking the FP&A forecast and importing them both in, looking at them both at the same time, and the ability to blend them and compare them and use them for different purposes. So with that, Ernie, let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Nate and Alf. And I know it was a little bit of a quick demonstration, but I think it was incredibly insightful to see the possibilities that are there. And just in terms of the variance analysis and getting better. So I'm sure Nate and Alf would be more than happy to give anyone a more detailed demonstration. So let's wrap things up with some key points. And this is, again, I love these best practices. So in 3 areas: communicate, right? You need business partnering, monitor and share metrics, ongoing dialogue. You need to focus, collect and analyze data that matters, right? Data diet. Focus, dates and periods of time that matter most, efficiency and automation, right? And then finally, the bottom line here, clearly define the goals of your forecast, understand your data, closely work with AP and AR, right, to capitalize your understanding, and probably maybe your senior executive team for those capital expenditures they like to spring on us. Identify your professional colleagues who face similar cash forecasting challenges. Go out, go to virtual events, go to LinkedIn groups, build a case study, and then invest in the right technology and the right solution partner. So I'm going to go ahead and actually give you a couple of polling questions here at the end as I make some closing comments. So please, those of you who are interested in CTP credits, please hang on for a moment. We had a lot of content to get through, and we started just a minute or two late because I wanted everyone to experience the content here in its fullest. And so one of the things that I want to mention before we wrap things up today is Treasury webinars. We are going to deliver the first ever full-blown Treasury and Finance virtual conference. And so it's more than webinars back to back. It's more than Zoom meetings. You can experience everything you can at a conference and more. You have the opportunity to express your interest in having me register you for that conference here in the post-webinar survey. Again, if you are interested in receiving CTP credits, you'll have to stay on the line for that. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys another 3 or 4 seconds here. Close that polling question. Then I'm going to go ahead and open our final polling question here. Just want to get a sense of the technology landscape, just where people are in terms of that technology stack. And so I encourage everyone to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions about the content or anything more general in terms of COVID and challenges, but also how to be more connected, right, to your peers. And also we're changing the way that we consume professional development. So I'm always happy to have those conversations as well. And you can look for future collaborations that I will have with financial sciences. And so first and foremost, I want to thank Kurt and Alf and Nathan for their valuable time today and their tremendous insights. And so thank you very much for spending your time with us today, sharing those insights with us. Also want to thank Financial Sciences, who is our webinar partner today and our thought leadership partner, and a long time running one as well. So we sincerely appreciate their commitment to the thought leadership that they share with me. And finally, to you, the audience, thank you so much for your valuable time. I do sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and make the rest of your day great, everyone. Until next time.